Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I am your host, Edgar Mills. Thanks for joining us. Hello, America, and welcome to episode 23 of the Junto Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about some urban and suburban sustainable living, different methods and techniques and philosophies and things like that. But very first thing I want to go into here is that I would love to give a big thanks to the great state of California. Now, I know that's odd because I'm usually at political odds with California policies and things, but once again, it could have been the greatest state in the union. But the reason I'm thanking them is because behind my home state of Georgia, that is the second most listenership for my podcast. So thanks, California. I appreciate that. And then I want to give a very special thanks to the beautiful home of my ancestors and the home of Murphy's and Guinness Irish Stouts, the country of Ireland. Yeah, because they, behind the United States, has the second highest listenership of my podcast internationally. So thank you to my Irish cousins. And for all of you, please reach out and give feedback. And thanks for sticking with me. And I hope to continue to deliver compelling and thoughtful topics to you guys. So, to the topic at hand. Today, folks, we're going to be talking about sustainable living in urban and suburban environments, and we're going to relate those to some of the principles and philosophies that Benjamin Franklin laid out for us centuries ago. The philosophy, libertarian values, and the value of self-reliance and individual liberty. So, a little bit about Benjamin Franklin. Everybody knows who he is, but Benjamin Franklin, his youth, he didn't come up in a wealthy family. He was the youngest in a very large family, and he had extremely limited formal education. I think he left school at the age of 10. Well, his parents pulled him from school or whatever at the age of 10. Now, he was born in Boston, Massachusetts. So there were still very, very formal institutions back in those days in the early 1700s. So they pulled him from school at the age of 10 to help with his dad's business, which was, he was making soap and a candle maker. And from 10 to 12, young Benjamin worked with his dad. And then at the age of 12, he took an apprenticeship under his older brother, James, who was a printer. And that's where Benjamin Franklin learned his trade. And that's where he really sharpened his writing skills. And even at that young age, he was submitting anonymous articles to the newspaper. And he had such a passion, for self-improvement and for reading and for learning, that he was essentially from that point on self-educated. And this experience developed his resourcefulness and his independence and his work ethic and his creativity and all those things. So in the days of young Ben Franklin, and think back, folks, I'm talking about pre-industrial revolution, well back beyond that. The typical family led a very agrarian lifestyle, and it was centered around self-sufficiency. You had to be self-sufficient. You didn't just run to the grocery store or run to the shop to get something fixed. You came up with the sun, you farmed your crops, you tended your animals, and you preserved your own food. They cured food, canned food, and things like that. Manual labor was just a norm. They churned butter, they made their own clothing, and they relied on locally sourced materials like firewood, like getting water from a river or creek. Especially in a rural environment, most people lived in proximity to some kind of water source. I mean, that's how you got water. So back in the day, pre-industrial revolution and beyond, Yeah, what we're calling sustainable living these days was just normal life in those days. Now, look, I'm not poo-pooing on technology or anything like that. I'm just saying that was the norm. It was very normal. The result of that lifestyle, well, there was minimal waste and very high physical demands on people. Now we look today, we think, oh, high physical demand, but you know, people were strong, people were hard. It was just the normal way of life. Modern sustainable living techniques are very similar to the ways of old. Composting organic waste, your food, that's a big thing. Composting, that's well, we'll get to the sort of community around that kind of thing here in a little bit. Growing your own food, garden, having your own gardens, to something as simple as walking and biking versus driving to work if you live in proximity. In order to save money, yeah. In order to reduce emissions, yeah. But also in order to be more fit. And then these days, technology came along, so we have solar panels. We have ways to get energy beyond just Georgia Power, beyond getting raped every day by Georgia Power. And these days, this sustainability movement, now sometimes it's driven by, your conscience, to be a good steward of the earth. Sometimes it's driven by politics. We're not going to get into that too much, but rather than necessity, right? Back in the day, it was necessity. There was no Green Party. There was no climate, change and stress. It was just necessity. And these days, there's various reasons for it. And these days, you don't have to be a Luddite to want to live sustainably. You can buy energy efficient appliances and things like that so that you still have modern conveniences, you know what I mean? And global connectivity, right? Nobody wants to give up their phone. But there are environmentally friendly ways to have modern conveniences, more environmentally friendly. Lithium's still being mined, regardless. Anyway, so the comparison of the old ways versus the modern sort of sustainability movement, there's a shared emphasis, almost on harmony with nature. We want to be in tune with nature, and we don't want to disrupt nature too much. And these days, there's a lot of innovation around minimalist living, and fighting climate change and things like that. I happen to believe climate change is just a normal thing, that the earth is going to do what the earth does no matter what we do. I believe that politically, I believe that the majority of these climate activists, I believe they act and think in a very arrogant way. I don't believe that mankind on this earth is even a blip on the scale of this earth, and by the damage that we can do. We can make our lives miserable, but the reality is I believe the earth is just going to fix itself when it's time to fix itself. And people make reference to the giant floating mass of trash in the Pacific Ocean or somewhere. Yeah, I'm not saying we're not dirtying the place up, but I don't believe we're ever going to. I believe the earth. Okay, I'm not going to go into all that political stuff. At any rate, innovation, different methodologies of fighting climate change and living more sustainably and less consumption, in contrast, to the early days where resourcefulness and being frugal, being a minimalist, that was just because there was limited options. That was just out of necessity. And there ain't nothing wrong with that either. There ain't nothing wrong with that either. Ben Franklin had sort of definitely self-reliance, right? A principle or an attitude of self-reliance. And he had an attitude of sort of waste not, want not, obviously from the lifestyle that he grew up with. So his ideas of being frugal, but also being innovative and having work ethic, all of those things challenge today's sort of disposable culture in consumerism, like rampant consumerism. Now, I myself, good people, am an unrepentant capitalist, and I do consume, but I also believe that I also produce at least services, if not goods, to exchange goods and services, right? But the consumerism I'm referring to, you can also sort of say materialism, where you want things, things, things. But then in today's society, things, even cars these days seem to be disposable. You might get 100,000 miles or so out of them, then they break down. It costs too much money to fix, so you just buy a new car or a used car. In contrast, if you guys remember, anywhere from I'd say 70s or 80s, probably the 80s, all the way up to about the early 2000s, Toyotas, they were 3, 4, 500,000 miles. Those things were little indestructible, dependable tanks, and that kind of quality, I think is lacking a little bit, and at least in the car business. So that's what I'm saying. Something even as big of a purchase as a car is still kind of disposable these days. And we depend on these external goods and services, folks. And dependency on anything ultimately is going to be bad. Dependence on anything is ultimately going to be bad in the long run. If we can have these ideas, that if we can live by the principles that Ben Franklin laid out for us, we can be empowered to be more autonomous in our own lives. And then that will foster some creativity. And I'll point you to a recent blog that I did called The Paradox of Constraints, and where I talked about innovation through necessity, minimal options. Right? You live simply, not because you're a simple person, but because you simply don't have the resources to live extravagantly. And what that does is creates a sort of resourceful urgency. You learn how to do things in a different way to acquire the things you need. And it also kind of encourages divergent thinking and how to reframe your situation, right? Scarcity becomes opportunity. Scarcity becomes opportunity. And we all know the quote, necessity is the mother of invention. But the earliest example of that came from Plato. Yeah. In the Republic, Plato wrote, "Our need will be the real creator." So yeah, I think living simply is also ultimately a more creative way to live. Because if you can go purchase all the things you need, then what is your thought process? Dipping your toes in the pool, right? And chilling and sipping on, a cocktail. So in this episode, folks, we've already gotten into it. We're going to talk about some personal benefits of simple living, some practical applications, some things we can do, and how it can sort of enhance our own individual liberty and autonomy, and how it can maybe enhance our own sort of financial freedom or independence and overall well-being, folks, and eventually just being a better, more well-rounded person for it all. So what are some of the urban sustainable living basics? Well, that implies some things like reducing the amount of waste we produce. Folks, everything that you consume creates waste unless you pick an apple off a tree. And even then, you usually toss the core, right? That core is waste. Now, an apple core will compost pretty quickly. But at any rate, if you go to McDonald's and get your Happy Meal, you've got a lot of waste that goes along with that artificial food. So, urban sustainable living, we talk reducing waste, reusing available resources if possible, cutting excess consumption in your home, at your work, and in your daily life. Now, I'm gonna say a thing here. These are some song lyrics from way back, and I'm gonna share with you. Excess ain't rebellion. You're drinking what they're selling. Your self-destruction doesn't hurt them, and your chaos won't convert them. That's some real stuff, folks. The song was fun. right? Rock and Roll Lifestyle by Cake. The song was fun, but excess ain't rebellion. You're drinking what they're selling, folks. That's the way it is. You're drinking Coke or Pepsi. You don't make your own stuff. You don't drink water, natural water, right? Just very literally. You're buying what they're selling. How many people rushed to American Eagle to pick up a pair of jeans on this latest campaign with, the blonde-headed girl that's all the controversy? I can't think of her name right now. The American Eagle ad campaign with blue jeans. You're drinking what they're selling, folks, and that's a part of the autonomy, right? Is you choose what you consume, not the 4 or 5 corporations that own everything on the planet. Ultimately, this leads us down the road to personal autonomy instead of relying on these behemoth corporations or government services to sustain your life. I don't want to get into these corporations too much, but you guys are fully aware that probably I want to say 7 or 8 big conglomerates own very nearly everything we consume in food and in medicine in those realms. And it's bizarre. And down here on ground level, we look at Burger King and then we look at KFC and we go, oh man, I don't know which one do I want. It all goes to the same place, folks. It just all goes to the same place. So it's just bizarre, but I don't want to get into that too much. I want you guys to go back in time with me a little bit to, I don't know what year it was, early 2000s. There was an animated movie called WALL-E. Yeah, WALL-E. WALL-E. Now, folks, this was a brilliant movie. I don't care if you hate Disney or Pixar or whatever. If you watch this movie from a perspective of libertarianism, and yeah, the movie was a little bit environmentalist sort of, but it was more than that. It was way much more than that. And this was a future where the earth, folks, was completely consumed with trash, and all the humans they all lived in these AI hyper technical luxury spaceships. The entire population of Earth was sent up to space in these spaceships that were run by artificial intelligence. And the people on these were obese and had zero bone density. And everything was at their touch or their thought. All they had to do was say a thing, and that thing would be delivered to them. Artificial food, artificial entertainment, whatever, but no physical activity. No. And so all the people, if you look back at this and you go, oh my God, they were all fat. Yeah, they were all fat and blobby, like amorphous. You know what I mean? And the story, WALL-E he was the little trash compactor. That was his job. And he was the only robot on Earth. And his job was to scoop up trash, compact it into a little cube. And then WALL-E, out of boredom, the robot got bored, right? And he started building these trash skyscrapers. And then Eve came down, and her job in life was to detect life, to detect organic life. So her and WALL-E teamed up, and they got, it was a little love story, and it was nice, and it was cute. And eventually Eve found a little twig, a little plant that was just emerging from dirt. And ultimately, Eve takes this back to the big spaceship. I think the big mothership was called Axiom or something like that, which was run by AI, and by the way. And yes, Eve and WALL-E fall in love. Yes, they do find life and they take it back. But there was a big plot, right? The plot by AI was to keep the people fat and happy and in space, never again to inhabit Earth. And fortunately, the sort of token captain of the ship grew some nuts. And then, right, they went on a journey to rediscover their sense of purpose and to repopulate Earth. It was much deeper than just an animated film ought to be. And it was a warning of unchecked consumerism. I think also a warning of unchecked AI and then environmentalism, right? Unchecked waste, unchecked consumerism. And the earth literally was completely covered in trash. Now, I'm not trying to go dark here. I thought it was a brilliant film. Even then, I liked it. I thought it, but looking back on it with a different lens, man, it's really pretty deep. But it's a cautionary tale, folks. That's exactly what it is. On two fronts, on environmentalism and on AI. And three fronts, and on consumerism, really. So living simply, this helps us to be creative. Ben Franklin was very creative. Now, I bet most of you know that Ben Franklin created bifocals. But did you know also that Ben Franklin created swim fins? Yeah, flippers for swimming. How bizarre is that? So he was very creative, but everything that he did create, and think about this. This is the early 1700s, 1712, 15. He created the Junto Club. Well, it's probably a little later now. He created the Junto Club in 1727. So I want to say he was 21 years old when that happened. So this guy was creating and inventing things at a pretty young age, right? But he used local resources, folks, things that were available at that time. Good Lord. And there wasn't that much stuff. And he did it for self-improvement, but to improve other people as well. And the point is that you don't need all this whiz-bang stuff to be creative. And that mindset, that of creativity and simplicity, it counters this whole disposable earth mindset, this whole disposable goods consumerism mindset. And then it can lead you down the road and it will, folks, if you're wholly dependent on McDonald's to feed you, and you are wholly dependent on the government to pay your house note or rent, then you're depending on someone. If they choose to stop, then what are you going to do? You can't be wholly dependent on anything, folks. And I'm not being cynical about that. Well, with the exception of God and yourself and your maybe family. Yeah. If the government, like, let's use property rights, for instance. I own my property per se. I pay a mortgage on it. The property right taxes, if my property were paid for outright, and I'd still have to pay property taxes, or they're going to still come take my stuff away. And there's a dependency on government. Now, I don't like that, and I don't agree with that at all. But dependency is a problem because it kind of makes you, instead of an autonomous citizen, it kind of makes you a subject. And we want to avoid that, people. We sure do. So in your own life, how can shifting from consumerism foster your personal autonomy? Do you even consider yourself a consumer? Everybody buys things, but I mean like a consumer. Are you a creator also? Does it balance out? Is there a give and take in the way you live your life, or is it all take, take, take? What about personal autonomy that lowers your financial output? Yeah, just saving money by cutting things out of your life. And I'm not telling everybody to go out and live austere like it's the 1700s. I'm just saying, is it that bad? Is the alternative really that bad? I can tell you now, for about 4 years of my life, I didn't have an automobile. I didn't have a driver's license or an automobile. Even if I wanted one, I wasn't legally allowed to drive. Because when I was young, I thought I was a race car driver, and that didn't last. I rode a bike everywhere I went. That was the days when I was a bike messenger. I walked. If I was going to the local diner, I rode my bike. If I was going around town, and if I was going uptown or somewhere, I would take the MARTA train. occasionally I took a bus, but the train and a bicycle got me almost everywhere within, I don't want to say metro Atlanta, but you can get pretty well outside the belt line, not belt line, the friggin' 285 perimeter. You can get pretty far outside that on MARTA these days, but even back then you could too. Yeah, man. I thought it was miserable as far as taking a bus anywhere. Riding a train, did I think that was miserable? I saw some bizarre crap going on the train. Yes, I refer you back to, being a high trust society. Like if you're going to intermingle with other humans within society in close proximity, you need to be a high trust society for sure. But when I was a bicycle messenger and when I was on a bike, people, I can tell you this, I was the most fit in my life that I had ever been and that I would ever be again during that time. And as a bike messenger, I was putting anywhere between, slow days, somewhere around 70 miles, really hopping and popping days, up to 100 miles a day. And that was a series of sprints, by the way. It wasn't just cruising along nonstop. So, yeah, man, there's a fitness component there. I was fit. I felt good. I don't know. I got sidetracked on that. Yeah. What can you do in your life to foster your own independence and reduce your financial output and reduce your reliance on external systems, be they big corporation and things or government things? And why should you embrace this? I just gave you one perfect example is a physical fitness. When you're living a little more simply, you're more apt to have a more active lifestyle. Just something as simple as walking to the local grocery store or the local farmer's market or the local cafe or the local art gallery. Just walking places will make you more active. And folks, you'd be amazed at how much money you can save just not putting gas in your car twice a week, 3 times a week. Now, look, I know there's people that live in the burbs that drive to Atlanta every day, and you got a hour and a half one-way commute, twice a day. I get it. And what we're talking about here, though, folks, is little incremental changes, little small bites. I'm not trying to tell everybody to go all natural, sell everything you have, go Amish or anything. But hey, you should maybe check the Amish out and see what they got going on. What about mentally? What about some benefits mentally? I would say the more complex your life is, the more stress you're probably going to carry around. I'd say the more consumer debt that you have, the more stress you're going to have, probably. I think money is a big stressor in marriages and things like that. I think these people that spend potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars on higher education and then can't pay for those loans, no, they shouldn't be forgiven, by the way. However, you find out that your degree does not hold value in the real world, and now you're out driving Uber, paying off these bizarre debts. Yeah, think about that stuff, the amount of stress you can relieve if that was gone away. And then, folks, then there's the consumerism, the disposable world comes along with another thing, and that other thing is something that's prevalent in today's society, and that's instant gratification. We want it now. We get it now. Well, mentally speaking, psychologically speaking, emotionally speaking, folks, if we can practice restraint, if we can master our base urges and control our impulses, and you hedonists out there, you think, well, why should I? If I like something, I should do it. It makes me feel good. If you deeply and objectively analyze that, you may find that at surface level, most likely. You may find that to be surface level. Being able to control our impulses, folks, is what separates us from the savages and the animals. Having some inner discipline can help you break this consume and dispose cycle that we all live in to a degree. Yeah. Mastering and controlling your impulses. Yep. Yep. And then we build resilience, folks. If we can master our impulses, right, and we're more physically fit, and we're more mindful of just the waste, we can build resilience, and that will help us slowly but surely build economic freedom. And economic freedom, folks, is freedom, like it or not. You can be a hippie living in the woods and go as austere as you want to, but there's still a level that you need some economic or financial freedom to be able to do the things you want. As much as I would love to, we don't live in a society where we can function without some form of currency. Now that currency, well, we'll get to it. And in this vein, though, folks, if you emphasize and focus quality over quantity with the things that you do buy, quality over quantity. Don't buy cheap stuff knowing that in 6 months it's going to break and you're just going to go buy another one. Yes, it creates waste. Yeah, it creates waste. And you can minimize that just by buying more quality stuff, even maybe if it costs a little more. And we can also, on that note, when we need things, we can get into these groups and engage in voluntary exchanges, folks. Yeah. Have a neighbor. And me and my neighbor, he helps me more than I help him because he's got more lawn equipment and yard equipment than I have. I don't know if you guys know this, but attachments for a John Deere little small tractor, those you're starting at like $2,000 upward. Man, it's crazy, right? Everything costs so much money. Thank God my neighbor has good stuff, but I will help him anytime he needs help as well. And if you can do these things where you help each other out and where you focus on quality over quantity and you minimize your waste and you start to build your own autonomy or your own little community of people who are autonomous, not depending on outside sources, that can help shield you from things we saw during the pandemic, like supply disruptions, supply chain. Anytime you try to get anything done during that time frame, everybody's excuse was supply chain disruptions. Yeah, because they were and it was a tool to be used against you. Well, if you're beyond that, then you're beyond that. And it'll even shield you from inflation. Inflation has nothing to do with bartering, folks. The government can't inflate barter because they don't have their greedy hands on it. So how do you think kind of curbing that consumerism a little bit will give you more control on your life? Maybe even a little feeling of accomplishment by not indulging on the things, the wasteful things or the temporary things. So I alluded to neighbors, folks, community, voluntary community efforts, not coerced systems. Now, what am I referring to when I say a coerced system? Folks, community is not communism. I say again, community is not communism, even though they share the same root word. I mean voluntarism. Voluntarism, good people, is the way. And I'll tell you this, if you are an extreme progressive liberal and you vote, you think, yes, we need high taxes to pay for all these programs, what is stopping you from voluntarily paying more taxes and letting those of us who disagree with that not pay taxes? What's stopping you from that? Somewhere near half of America does believe in high taxes and government control. Somewhere near, allegedly. Well, that's not true. Probably closer to about 1/4 of America. And then 1/4 of America is probably on the extreme other side of that. And then probably about half of America is just whatever. They're not even engaged. But I digress. So community does not mean communism. Okay, now back to it. Voluntary community efforts, folks. So I'm going to push something here. On that note of the voluntary community efforts, coming up very soon in November, on 8 November, November the 8th, 2025, the Great Create DIY Freedom Festival is coming to Ackworth, Georgia. Now, I've done the Great Create for the past 2 years, and yes, it's a libertarian-centric event, but what that means is nobody's trying to push any ideology on you at all. But it's a do-it-yourself festival. And people, there's tables there, there's lectures and little classes, and there's homeschooler types, and there's mushroom growers and beer brewers and solar-powered people, and one lady who was there last year, and I wish I could remember her name. She is a urban sustainable living sort of guru, and I was fascinated with what she had going on, and I just right now I cannot put my name on her, put a name to it. So I highly encourage you, folks. Like, tickets are like $32, and I'm going to put a link on the show notes here. The Great Create DIY Freedom Festival, November 8th, and that's going to be at I think George Washington Carver Park in Ackworth. So yeah, man, check that out. It is a good time. So back to it. What about how can we resource food production, right? We can grow our own vegetables and fruits and stuff on, especially now I said urban and suburban sustainability, right? What about rooftop gardens or balcony gardens? You don't have to have a whole acre of land to plant some crops, you know what I mean? You can do it on a small scale. In fact, you should do it on a small scale, because natural food just don't keep like canned friggin' preservative food does. Hydroponic systems, community gardens. Here in South Rome, I live in Rome, Georgia, and in South Rome, which unfortunately a lot of people consider South Rome the hood. Now, I've seen a lot of hoods in my day. I grew up, all over South Atlanta. I grew up, East Point and College Park and places like that. And I'm telling you now, South Rome is not the hood. However, there's a community garden in South Rome, and it's a very small, it's not even a quarter acre little plot of land. But man, they got a nice little community garden. And the little individual plots are probably, I don't know, probably about 12 by probably 6, little plots, kind of little, almost raised garden beds a little bit. And yeah, it does quite well, and it's well maintained, and people get fruits and vegetables and things, and then whatever's seasonal, things like that. And it's pretty awesome. You can do indoor farms, folks. You can do, if you got a storage shed, you could put LED grow lights in there, and you can grow things. And that's little stuff. That's not like you're not getting your steak right from that, but there's ways to do that too outside of the norm. And I will tell you, there's a Cook Farm. I want to say thecookfarm.com or something in Cedartown. Yeah, if you want you and your neighbors, if you and 3 or 4 other folks go in and buy, you can buy meat, or you can buy a cow, and they'll process it, and you'll have meat for the rest of the year. Now, yeah, you need a freezer to put that meat in. But there's other ways, folks. There's other ways. What about energy conservation or generation? How do you generate energy off grid? Well, that's hard, but almost anything is preferable to getting literally raped by Georgia Power every month. Technology is not bad, folks. Now, I'm telling you, solar power is coming along. It's not, I don't think it's there yet, but it will be. But on a small scale, little solar panels, little portable chargers. You can stick little solar panels out your window to charge your little power, your little devices and stuff. You might not be able to run your refrigerator or your big box freezer on it. And certainly don't plug up your toaster oven to it, but little things you can do to sort of decrease your power consumption. Energy efficient appliances. Yeah, you can do that stuff if you're not opposed to technology. That stuff costs a little more up front, but I think over time it it pans out. The question is it got long-term reliability? LED lights, low flow plumbing fixtures and things like that. Something as simple as just unplugging all the crap in your house when you're not using it. That will minimize your power output or consumption. And then I know every year, Georgia Power says stuff like this, but like if it's blazing hot, if it's 98 degrees outside and the sun shines directly in your living room, close your curtains. That will cut down. Insulate your windows. Or if the weather's good, in fall and spring for a very long time, especially in Georgia, you can leave your windows open, folks. Now, if you do live in the hood, that might not be the best option, but you can leave your windows open, get natural airflow in there. Natural airflow is preferable to air conditioner all day, every day, in my opinion. Yeah. And then if you're really clever, you can explore some wind turbines or some little micro hydro generators. I've seen some cool stuff online where people generate their own little bitty sort of hydro generators. And you can, yeah, you might power your phone, I don't know. It's cool though. It's a good concept and it's good survival stuff. And I like it. Yeah. What else? What about transportation? We talked about that earlier. Yeah, man, ride a bike. Cut your fuel costs in half simply by riding a bike a couple of days a week instead of driving, if you have the capacity to do that. But what if you don't? What if you live in the burbs, deep burbs? Most places have a rideshare parking lot off the interstate somewhere. Do rideshare or find a group of homies going in the same direction and make it a regular thing. Rotate who drives once a week, and that'll lower emissions. And if you're riding a bike, that'll boost your health. Yeah, public transportation. People love their cars. I love my cars. I got a 73 Ford F-250 that I love it. I'm not giving it away. I'm not giving it up. I'm keeping it forever until it dies. And I'm going to keep it going as long as I can keep it going. And only then until it dies beyond repair am I giving up that truck. That truck probably consumes about 7 or 8, gets about 7 or 8 miles per gallon, probably. It's got 360 in it. It's not efficient at all, but it's got a long bed. I can carry a lot of stuff in it. And if you put that thing in 4-wheel drive, you can climb friggin' Pikes Peak in that thing. But I don't drive it every day. I do drive my Land Rover, and it's got a V6 in it. Still doesn't get that great of gas mileage, but probably 3 times the gas mileage that my truck gets. But I also work from home. Yeah, man. Carpooling, bike, things like that. That's to do your part, right? Do your part. And then waste management and recycling and composting, things like that. If you start a little compost bin, then what can you do? Whatever the cycle is for that, then you can use that stuff just to fertilize the other soil around. You know what I mean? And it keeps you from having to go to friggin' landfill or to dump. Here's a new word that I'm only learning about is upcycle old items. Now, I think that's the same as what they used to call repurpose. Repurpose old items, old things. You know what I mean? If you got an old, I don't know what, if you got an old door that is broken or cut that thing down and build a table out of it or something, or build a cabinet. If you got I've seen people use old tires to build like retaining walls. Old ammo cans. Now, obviously you guys know I came up in the military and you acquire ammo cans, folks. You just acquire a lot of ammo cans. And I've seen people turn ammo cans into like planters, and paint them up, fill them with some dirt and topsoil, plant some flowers in there and hang, stick them out. Yeah, you can repurpose things. You can use them as storage containers. If you're like a die-hard, doomsday prepper, It's real easy to use an ammo can to put provisions in and then seal that thing up. Yeah. You can do a lot of things, man. You can repurpose a lot of stuff. I see one guy had like a windmill and it was it was a bicycle wheel that had a single cog on it for gear, and that gear, connected to another gear, and it was a little wind turbine. It generated a little energy. It wasn't anything crazy, but hey, it was cool. It was a reuse of a thing. Yeah. What about clothes? Now, if you don't donate your clothes to the homeless, and they're like just ragged clothes, turn them into shop rags. Make quilts and stuff like that, man. Don't just toss them. Yeah. And then Germany, right? When we were in Germany, they don't have grocery bags over there. You bring your own bag, period. Or you're just carrying all your stuff out. But you can do that here in America. You can bring your own bag. They'll put the groceries in whatever you want to put them in. Yeah. Things like that. What about rainwater? If you live in the city, can you collect rainwater and use that water? Maybe not for drinking. I mean, you can. You could filter it and use it for drinking. But what about using it for gardening or using it for cleaning? Instead of running your water in your sink, you use the rainwater that you've collected, put a few drops of bleach in that, let it, get rid of all the gross stuff, and then use that for cleaning your house and cleaning your stuff. Yeah, man. Yeah. What about that? A lot of people don't know how a toilet works. But all you gotta do is you can turn the water off, use your rainwater to fill the tank up. Boom, gravity flushes, and then you just use your rainwater to fill the toilet back up. Does that take a little effort? Yes, it does. Could you potentially rig up some kind of rainwater catch system that actually filters and drains down into your toilet tank? Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could. All kinds of things, man. All kinds of things. All right, so what about sort of community? What about some economic sort of practices that you could do within your community? All right. What about farmers markets versus, Publix? Yeah, go to farmers market. Every Wednesday there's a farmers market here in Rome. I'm sure most little places have a farmers market. The stuff is fresh. Usually it's local folks selling their goods that they themselves have grown, which is very good. That's good. That's correct. Now, what are you supposed to do? It's on you. Yeah. Take it home, wash it off, make sure, but it doesn't have to go through all this processing that it does at the grocery store. Or at least support small producers, like Cook Farms, for instance, or Cook Farm. Small producers, folks, the little guy, help them out. Now, if you're a business person, it's all about, well, how do we scale? How do we scale this? Everybody wants to scale and make it bigger, 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 bigger. At what point does that, I don't know, start being a detractor? Yeah, you might be scaling, you might be getting more money, but it costs more money to grow as well. At what point is it no longer, you've reached your benefit max, your cost to benefit ratio, you've maxed it out. At what point is that? I guess Walmart never reached that, right? They scale. They're everywhere. There's Walmarts in Germany, by the way. Yeah. I'll tell you what about bartering, folks? Goods and services. Now, I have many times bartered firearms training for some service. Yep, I have. And if you're willing to barter your goods or services, the money's out of the equation. That's a tax benefit, correct? Yeah. That's why it's important to be a community-minded person. Find out what people in your community do. Yeah. You can build little neighborhood groups as long as it's voluntary, folks. As long as it's voluntary and there's mutual benefit. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, trade your services or even your labor, for things like, I don't know, maybe you can go, maybe there's a little old lady down the street who has a big yard and her husband died but she was a school teacher for, 40 years. Maybe she can tutor your kid and you go cut her grass, once every couple weeks. And then she tutors your kid, a couple, 3 times a week. And then your kid's better for it. Her yard's cut. She don't got to get out and friggin' have a stroke in the yard. And all you had to do is go cut grass for, an hour once every couple weeks. Think about that kind of stuff, folks. It's, we're so advanced these days, and it's lost. Things like that are lost. What about this? Little co-ops. So on every military base I've ever been on, now every military base is its own little unique community, folks. Now there's plenty of people who live off post. True, I always lived off post as well. But they had like an auto shop, for instance. They had a bay where you could go and it cost, I don't know, $8 or $12 for you to go rent space in like a mechanic bay to where you could take your car in there. It had lift and they had all the tools necessary. Then you could go in and do minor repairs on your car on your own. And there might have been like one mechanic on hand who would answer questions for you, but he didn't work on your car for you. He was just there kind of manning the shop. You go in there and do your thing. You pay $12 and then whatever the parts were you went and bought yourself. And then you got all the use of these tools that would cost you an arm and a leg otherwise to purchase. That was brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant thing about on base doing that kind of stuff. What about little lending library? Like there's little freestanding book lending libraries that are around in parks and stuff around here. So you walk by and there's no, hey, high trust society, folks. This is high trust society stuff. You see a book in there that you like, you look at it. Oh man, I want to read this. You take it, you read it, you bring it back. Yeah, it's very simple. I'll look around some of them and they're empty and people just take the books, never bring them back. That's low trust. That's low trust stuff right there. There's little, what's the word I'm looking for? Lending closets on Army bases. Yeah, this was a thing on Army bases. Imagine, if you will, kind of like a thrift store, except you would go in here and you would just sign for, if you needed a microwave, for instance, you didn't have a microwave, you're a young family, you got kids, you need a microwave or a toaster oven. You go sign that thing out, man. Hey, I need a toaster oven for a couple weeks until I can buy one. Or I don't know I don't remember if there were time limits on these things, but yeah, you had to bring it back. You clean it up, take it back, and then somebody else can use it later. They had all kind of things like that. Home appliances like carpet cleaners, things like that. Even refrigerators and kind of like critical items. Everybody really needs a refrigerator. Yeah, so think about that. Why can't there be a community lending closet? Now, would that be, I don't know, some people might be too prideful to use that. I don't know. And it might be abused. In a low trust society, it would probably be abused. But anyway, consider it. So what kind of personal skills can we acquire for these little lifestyle adjustments? Well, do-it-yourself repairs. I can tell you this, from the time I was a private all the way up to an E6, well, before the whole time until I went to Special Forces, and even in Special Forces, I had a sewing machine because I had to take pockets on and off of my uniforms and sew on name tapes and take name tape. This was all pre-Velcro, by the way. I sewed up holes in my clothes because I couldn't afford uniforms, even though you got a clothing allowance. Yeah, I get it. Learn how to take care of your stuff. Learn how to sew things up that it still looks nice and normal. I was essentially a bike mechanic for my own bicycles when I was a bike messenger. Yeah, you had to keep that thing running because that's how you made the money. No bike, no money when you're a bike messenger. So you gotta keep those things running. Now, yeah, if your frame breaks, yeah, unless you're a welder, but maybe you could go to the local garage and use their welder. You know what I mean? If you know how to use it. Learn how to, fix crap around the house. I'm not a good handyman. I'll admit it. I'm not a good handyman around my house. But if it's a critical thing, I will get on that, do my best. But I also like to keep the local economy going, right? And then when I say minimalism, folks, I want you guys to understand that this is not like austere living. You don't have to live like a caveman or an Afghan to practice minimalism. Just once again, quality over quantity, right? Have the essentials and have good essentials. Yeah. And that way you kind of curb the consumer, you don't dispose of things and buy them over and over again. If you can, here's a good little habit. If you have the means, I'll tell you what the pandemic did for me that made me see that, because there's always some good that comes from a thing. Well, the good wasn't the vaccines, that's for sure. And it certainly wasn't government mandates of anything. But what did happen was companies discovered that, well, yeah, they could work remotely. Now, I believe this to be 100% true. If you can work remotely, folks, why not? What's the point of commuting to work if you can do everything sitting at your own home office, wearing your PJs, drinking your own coffee, with your own dog sitting right next to you at your feet? You get on your little Zoom call, you do your little 10-minute morning meet. Hey guys, what's up? Here's our priorities. Here's what we got to have accomplish. Hit me up no later than 1800 tonight to let me know the status. All right, everybody have a great day. Boom, bam, done. So many places can do that. And they did that during the pandemic, and it was functional. And I think there's studies out there that prove that you would think you would be more distracted at home, but I think there's studies that show the opposite of that, where you actually get more done even with your own little home distractions, because your little distractions don't take you away from work necessarily. I might be doing a thing. I get up, I go kiss my wife, smack her on the butt, pour myself something to drink, pet the dog. You know what I mean? Go watch about 5 minutes worth of news and come sit back down, pick right up where I left off. But what they discovered also is that you're more apt to work earlier or later than you would if you went to work. Because imagine this, folks, a lot of people, like I said earlier, you might have somewhere around an hour and a half commute one way. You're taking that out of your life. That's 3 extra hours you have in your day to be more productive, to be present in your own home, et cetera, et cetera. I think that right there was a thing, folks. I think that was a thing. And I think that thing needs to stick around for places that can do it. You can't be a stay-at-home mechanic, folks. I'm sorry. You can't be a stay-at-home plumber. But all these friggin', IT, these consulting, all these people that sit behind a computer in a cubicle and have minimal interaction with the people in the next cubicle. That's bizarre, man, when you can just do it from home. And if you want to bring people together, if you want to meet your coworkers, if you're a boss man, once a month or once a quarter, plan a get together. Not even a work get together. I mean, like, hey, we're going to link up at this park. We're going to have a, cookout. We'll talk a little business. Then we'll play some volleyball. Blah, blah, blah. Boom, bam, boom. You can do it, folks. It can be done. And then what else can you do? Well, I bring you back to the Great Create. You can go to workshops, or you can link up with other groups of people who already do the kind of things you're considering. And you can learn, and you can determine, is this for you or not? Excuse me. Sorry. And then, if it takes a political turn, if you're in a larger group, you have a more likely chance of influence in policy. But the Great Create, folks, that's where a large group of very smart people come together to talk about just alternative networks, folks, alternatives to the the norm of big consumerism and big waste. What about yourself? Are there some habits that you can think of offhand that you can adapt to combat this disposable lifestyle, this disposable society we live in? I don't know, man. Do some research on Ben Franklin. Look back at the way he implemented sort of self-empowering changes. I'm going to give you an analogy here, and this may hit, it may not. But if you're an action shooter, those of you that come out and shoot with me, you know that the shot timer is a pretty important thing. Is it the most important thing? Nah, maybe not, but it's pretty important. And if you shoot matches, stages of a match are measured in seconds and tenths of seconds and hundreds of seconds, folks. And inefficient movement, or if you miss a reload, or you miss a target and have to go back, that can cost you, anywhere from, that could cost you a few seconds, or it could cost you, let's say 3/4 of a second, 0.75 seconds. And you go, 0.75 seconds, boom, no big deal. Well, if you make similar mistakes over the course of 6 stages, so do you know what I'm saying? If I make a 0.75 second mistake 3 times, that's 2.25 seconds. And if I do that in 6 stages, that's 13.5 seconds. Folks, 13.5 seconds in a USPSA match, it may as well be a lifetime. The top competitors are winning by literal hundreds of seconds. Maybe a couple, maybe at max, one top grandmaster competitor might beat the other top grandmaster competitor by literal 1 second or half a second. Yeah. So these hundreds add up to tenths and add up to whole seconds. And those seconds, boom, they start adding up. Every little move. The opposite is true, folks, when considering these little lifestyle adjustments. I have a friend, and his Instagram is Trail Trash Dirtbag. And he started a very simple yet very important little movement. And that movement was, if you're out on a trail hiking or riding or walking or on a sidewalk and you see a piece of trash, pick it up. Individually, that has very little impact. You picked up one little piece of trash in downtown Atlanta. And look, it ain't your job, right, to go around. If you decided to pick up all the trash in down, you would never have time to do anything but pick up trash. But this is the hundreds, tenths, and whole seconds sort of thing here. If say out of the 300 people walking around, 10 people witnessed you pick up that trash, or maybe all 300 witnessed it, but maybe out of that, maybe 10 folks will be like, you know what, man, how hard is it to pick up trash? So they'll pick it up too. Then let's say a few hundred people saw them do that, and then, out of that, maybe 10 people saw that from someone else and they're like, oh man, that's a good dude. I should do that. I want to be a good dude too. Eventually, your simple act of picking up a piece of trash multiplied into who knows how many people picking up a piece of trash. Next thing you know, you've had an impact on your community cleanliness and then just the general culture of your community. Yeah, think about that. And follow Trail Trash Dirtbag. So what's some practical things, folks? Practical things we can do to live sustainably at Ben Franklin level wisdom, right? Ben Franklin level wisdom. First, you got to always, and I don't care what the topic is, you always have to examine yourself, right? Analyze your consumption and find ways where you as an individual can gain independence from unnecessary things. Almost, now I don't want to go so far as to relating it to addiction, but some people are addicted to consumerism and materialism. And it's almost like that. You're almost breaking free from an addiction if you can stop going out to eat all the time. I have a problem with that. If my wife doesn't feel well, I go to the Waffle House, man. Yeah. And then I said it a few times throughout. Personal ethics, folks. You've got to be a trustworthy person to help our society become a high trust society. Just like with someone seeing you pick up trash, it might influence others to pick up trash. You be trustworthy, and others will want to be trustworthy. Barter and share resources voluntarily, folks. Offer up resources voluntarily if you have resources and you know someone else doesn't. All this without any government mandates. All this without any regulation, folks. All right. Build community networks. Yeah. I take you back again to the Great Create. That is a community of humans that one, they're great humans. Two, the scope of their knowledge on just various things is humbling and astonishing. I have my own little piece of that, but I'm blown away at how brilliant some of these other people are. And that, folks, that supports our First Amendment of free association. Right? I don't need the government telling me who I can and can't get, in life friggin' who I can and can't get life advice from. Yeah. Freedom of association. Learn, build a network, build an alternative network of people that you trust, that you can rely on and that can rely on you. Yeah. Yeah. And if you're new to all this and you're living in this consumer lifestyle and you're going to work every day in the city and you're like, man, this is just madness. How can you, as someone new to this or how can you start finding ways to reduce reliance on external goods? You can, but how can you? Yeah. How can you be more self-reliant and not reliant on some external system? So folks, urban sustainable living, it's possible. Suburban sustainable living. Now, notice I didn't talk much about rural sustainable living. There's, folks, there's people out there doing it. There's people out there doing it every day. They got them 5 acres or 10 acres of land. They've got their own water procurement. They've got livestock roaming around on their property. A couple goats, handful of chickens. Yeah. There's people out there doing it. It takes work to do, folks, but urban sustainable living, yeah, you're not going to have a cow in your midtown apartment. But the goodness of wanting to do this thing in an urban environment is it will force some creativity and ingenuity. Yeah, yeah, and you will be able to, once you start like seeing these little alternatives that you can do in a city environment, it's going to blow your mind and you're going to be like, man, this is possible. This is possible. It's doable. The city is just one big place that it's just a consumerism and disposal and consume, right? Dispose and consume. It's just the city encourages that. Dispose and consume. Now there's little communities who really get into trying to do things, but still any major urban environment is a dispose and consume environment, man. It's just constant. Well, look at that, start to recognize that, and then turn that into, opportunities for yourself to break away. Take small steps, folks. Start with your little, live in an apartment building, start with your neighbor, man, and then spread to other tenants in the building. Yeah. And see how you guys can help each other and consume less. Now, I'm not telling you to go burn all your possessions. I absolutely abhor the song Imagine by John Lennon. Yeah, I do. I think John Lennon was a big giant communist, and I do not imagine no possessions. Yeah, F that guy. You should have possessions. You should have things that you want, folks. But as your want and need, you definitely should have things you need. But am I telling you you shouldn't have things that you want? No, I'm not. If you have a car because if you like your 65 Mustang, I'm not telling you get rid of your 65 Mustang. I'm saying, instead of driving it to work every day, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, leave her in the garage and ride your bike. That's what I'm saying. I happen to like motorcycles. Now, I had a really nice motorcycle and I had to sell it, for various reasons, but I'm not telling you to get rid of your stuff. I'm just saying downsize where you can, where it's practical, and recognize what's excess and what's not. Because I'll say it again, excess ain't rebellion. You're just drinking what they're selling. Do those things bring you genuine fulfillment? Yes or no? Think about that. Genuine fulfillment. If not, walk away from it. Yeah, that's it, folks. If the things you possess don't bring you genuine fulfillment, get rid of them and do things that do bring you genuine fulfillment. All right, folks, that was the episode. Thanks for listening to it. You know, I'm not an expert at all on this subject matter. I know people who are, but I think it's very relevant today. Every time I look at my power bill, I think it's relevant today. Yeah. And yeah, my wife and I are trying to work we're trying to figure out how we're going to keep some animals and do some things like that. And I encourage people to do it. I encourage people to venture out there and try things, man. For the environment's sake, sure. For financial sake, sure. For independence, absolutely. For financial independence, yep, absolutely. For minimizing government interference, yep, 100%. All those things, folks. And again, I'm going to have the Great Create website in the show notes. Again, November 8th in Ackworth, Georgia. I want to say tickets are $32. There's probably opportunity if you're a business owner and you're interested. There's probably opportunity to sponsor the event. There's probably an opportunity to get a table at the event if you do things in the vein of, self-reliance and independence and sort of classical liberal ideals and things like that. Yeah. And worst case, come out and hear me give a lecture on building alternative networks. Or, I don't know. I'm doing two lectures. I'm not sure what the other one's going to be, but one's definitely going to be alternative networks. So yeah, minimum, come out to Ackworth. I think it's going to be on the lake, and come out and have some good chow and some barbecue and see some interesting people, meet some interesting people, and do some, learn some things. And if you're just hardcore right wing or hardcore left wing, then come out and observe the weirdos. See what we got going on in the middle there. Yeah, come see what we got going on in the middle. All right, good people. At this point, I'm ranting. So thank you so much for listening to the episode. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Thank you so much, California, for being the second highest listenership behind my home state of Georgia. And thank you so much, Ireland, for being the second higher listenership behind my home country of America. I love all you guys. I appreciate all you guys. Be good to each other. Have good manners. And I'll see you next time.